Happy New Year. Welcome to REI 101 featuring my amazing co-host, my brother, partner in crime, Alberto Medellin. How was how were your holidays, brother?
Good. I mean, I've gotten that question a lot over the past couple of days, and I think my consistent answer has been I got rest, which was
Rest.
good. I got rest and spent a lot of time with family, with my granddaughter. Um, Ate a lot of food, but still did pretty good. Worked out, got some miles in, got some rucks in. So it was good though to like getting these properties closed out at the end of the year, which has been great.
Yeah.
So we don't have any inventory right now in the market, which is awesome. So uh, it's been going good. Like
Well,
it was a good finish to the year,
yeah.
and looking forward to riding that momentum into 2026.
You're one of the very few that can say that right now because inventory is at an all-time high. If you've been following the show or if you know anything about the market, you know that inventory is crazy high right now. We're like at
Hmm.
42,000 single family homes on the market. So congratulations on the closing. Uh,
Thank you.
I feel I, I feel I feel like I'm a winner just by being associated with you with these deals closing. But hey, it's just the beginning of the next chapter of the next stretch of the ride right here.
Yeah.
So January 2026, we're going to be starting our mindset series. I started a new book, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. This one's been on my list for a while, and I love, I don't always love it, but I really love studying the strategies and systems and processes of people that are more successful than me. And I know the success leaves clues. But one theme that constantly, whether it's not just with investing, leadership, marriage, spirituality, it all starts with thinking, starts with the mindset. And we know that's true in any area of success. If you want to do well in something, you've got to your mind has to be right. And so that's why in this show we do talk a lot about mindset
Hmm.
because it's it's critical to success. It's critical to accomplishing any task or goal. You have to think it or do it. And we know we teach our children the same thing, and then as adults we fail to live up to that lesson that we teach our children. My son is he's learning to ride his bike right now, and mind it is 100% mindset, 100% mindset. There is I don't know, and sometimes there's only so much that we can do for each other or for our children when it comes to mindset. We can't force people to change the way they think. But we can do a podcast talking about it, and hopefully somebody will take something from it,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. I mean, like it's just believing. I think it kind of starts there with believing that, hey, when I push this pedal, if I keep pushing the pedals and just look forward, I'm there's a really good possibility that I'm going to ride this bike and not going to fall.
yeah,
But it's the repetitions. We kind of talk about some of that stuff, putting in the reps, to develop that mindset, even
yeah,
learning to ride a bike.
yeah, and yeah, I think that's kind of a good example because he'll say something like, "I'm scared, I'm afraid," and I ask him, "What are you afraid of?" He says he's afraid of falling. I'm like,
Mhm.
I kind of want to push him whenever he says that because, like, dude, you are going to fall. That's a part of the process. You have to fall.
Mhm.
You better fall now, and then you get up and, the my older kids all experienced the same thing. They fell, and once they fell and they realized that they didn't die, they got back up and they rode their bike. Right.
And
So
they learned and they grew, right?
that's right. That's right. So in January, before we get into strategies, before we get into spreadsheets, deal analysis, yes, we're going to get all into all that. We're going to teach as much as possible. And we are doing real estate deep dives throughout the week. But we have to start with the most important thing piece. That is how investors think. Because if you don't change the lens you're using, there are no tactics in the world that's going to fix the outcome. So you can learn all the strategies that you want, but if you're not starting with the right mindset and thinking with the right approach, um, it's not going to play out. So today we're talking about thinking like an investor versus thinking like a consumer. And the challenge I want to propose to anyone on the call or listening is which in which ways do we tend to think like a consumer when we should be thinking more like an investor? So, on today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to pose and suppose some questions, some thinking questions. And if you're writing this down, if you have, your journal and you want to write some of these down, I suggest you write some down and just take some time to reflect. So, why this matters? The reason is because most people, in my experience, Albert, you can speak to this as well, but most people have a tendency to approach real estate with some type of consumer mindset as opposed to investor mindset. Do you find that to be true with your clients and people you're in business with?
Definitely. I mean, I'm myself included. When we were first thinking about investing, like that was one of the first questions that came up was like, can I afford like that mortgage payment? And I think it's a valid question,
Mm,
for really an investor too. But the consumer mindset stops there,
yeah,
right? That's like the limiting belief, right? I can't afford that monthly payment if something goes sideways, and then they start to overthink and overanalyze and needing everything to be perfect.
you're right.
You know what I mean? So like that's definitely a limiting, mindset, that consumer mindset, where an investor might think like, okay, what if I get this property, you know,
Hmm.
add this property to my portfolio, what problem will that solve? You know, I think
Yeah.
again on the consumer side, do do I like the property, right? Because and
Hmm.
that we're just trained and conditioned to purchase and consume, right? As a
Right.
consumer, right? And not necessarily to produce something, an asset, something that we can put out on the market for people, And so when we're walking through a property, again, I've fallen into this in the beginning, and Julia has done it too in the beginning. Is I don't like that house,
Yeah.
right? Or I don't like that layout, on the first few houses.
Yeah.
But an investor's like, okay, we need to change the paint, we need to move the walls here, we need to open up this living room, dining room area, kitchen area to make it more functional and more open, right? That's the investor mindset. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. No, that's a huge one. So asking yourself the question, what you said is a big one. Do I like it? Because I've seen a lot of new investors come into it and they're like, oh, maybe they don't like the location, like you said, or the layout, or instead of, and I'm guilty of this too. In fact, the music school, when we first relocated to Deer Park, uh, my wife found a building which eventually became the building that we occupied. But I walked into that building and immediately walked right out of the building because I couldn't. It did not work at all, and
Hmm.
I was not a real estate professional at the time. My vision has improved a lot when it comes to these types of scenarios. But she was able to say, "Hold on, come here. Look at the space. Look at the location. If you remove the walls, you have a box. And when you have a box, how would you rebuild it?" And then when you start thinking like, okay, I got to see this thing first of all without the walls, and then I got to put the walls back up, and it can be a completely different piece of property. So I love that question. Do I like it? Yeah. And you also mentioned payments. Definitely an important question to ask if you're buying a house that your family is going to live in. You want something that's going to be affordable. But with the real estate investment, uh, you're looking at the problems that they solve, right?
Right. Yeah. And so then like kind of taking it even one step further, right? Is okay, so we've got to move the walls, right? Or we've got to take up this carpet because there's a bunch of cat pee everywhere. If we've got to treat the property multiple times because there's fleas in it, a consumer might say to themselves, that's too hard. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do that,
Yeah.
right? And it's they don't want to get out of their comfort zone, you know? So then it's more of like, okay, an investor looks at it and said, okay, if I took the carpet out, how much is that going to cost, right? If I
Right.
had to bomb this house multiple times, have pest control come in, how much is that going to cost? Because I can put that cost and associate that with what's my return now, right? How
Mm-hmm.
is that going to increase the value of this property
Right.
when I go turn around and sell it or rent it out to someone if I do these things, right? So a consumer is more like, well, I don't want to do that because that's too hard. That gets me out my comfort zone. An investor is, hey, I'm looking for those properties because most people aren't going to want to do those things, but I'm
Right.
willing to do those things.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be uncomfortable because now that property is going to be a higher performing property.
100%. And I have seen that is such a big deal because I have seen with when it comes to house flipping, single family homes, I've seen the most money made on like your typical like hoarder houses that are filthy and there's animals and cat pee and you name it and trash up to the ceiling. But when you
Mhm.
take a step back, it's a newer home with a decent roof. I mean, Richard's on the call. He can attest to this. And we've shown investors property like this. And because the house is filthy, they get scared and they get freaked out. But the roof is in good condition. So when you think about it, replacing a roof for $12,000 plus, or you can clean the house for a few $1,000s, it makes a lot more sense to buy the dirty house that needs to be cleaned, like really, really cleaned, as opposed to a house that needs a new AC and a new roof, even though the rest of the house looks perfect. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And all that just really kind of leads to like everything that we've talked about so far just kind of leads to the fact that consumers typically buy something based off their emotions,
Yeah,
right? Like, how does this make me feel? Whereas investors, like we're looking at the numbers, the data, the math, the structure of the deal, and then the long term like strategy of that. So I think those are some key differences, right?
yeah. So emotion is that's a big one. So you're talking about emotion versus
Like
data.
data. Yeah.
So consumers they feel their way into the deals, and they can also feel their way into a lot of trouble by approaching that way. I think
Hmm.
investors are going to underwrite them. It's just a numbers game. There's no emotion tied to it.
Yeah. That's it. Like it's and consumers, right? Well, how much is this going to cost me? And they stop there. Investors are like, okay, how much is this going to cost? But also what's my return
Yeah.
on that cost, right? And again, back to the data, back to the numbers. When I talked to Julia about properties, about like, hey, yeah, what kind of countertops do you think we should put here, or,
Hmm.
or what kind of backsplash should we put here, or what kind of flooring should we do? And her response usually is like, what did the comp say? What does the data say? We
Yeah.
just need to be a little bit better than everything else in this
Yeah.
neighborhood. That's it. We don't have to go way overboard, right? And that's it. And it's all data.
Yeah.
Takes the emotion out of it. Because
It
I mean, I like we have black quartz countertops in our home where we live, and that's not, I don't I mean I love it. I think it looks really really cool. It looks very modern, but that's not going to work in every neighborhood.
right.
You know, maybe in some higher end kind of things it might work, but it's not going to work in a neighborhood where we're selling the property for $210,000.
You don't,
You know?
yeah, and I always try to remind investors that you don't have to have a lot of good taste. You're not Chip and Joanna Gaines. You don't need
No.
to approach it that way. It's just like what you're saying. If you know the market and you know what's selling in that community, you just got to be a little bit better than that. You don't have to go all the way to a 10 because If everything in that area is selling at a 7 or an 8, anything above an 8, you're entering that law of diminishing returns when you're in that
Mm,
community. So you don't, if everything is like the blonde oak and has like wood on it and things are selling and that's the top of the market, well, you don't have to replace everything with white granite and, new lighting and make it bright and light gray like the new construction is because that community is not necessarily calling for that.
right. Yeah, exactly. And
And
then, you got investors, and like another difference between consumers and investors is, right, the consumer is worried about just ownership,
yeah.
Investors, at least for me, it's like what's the least amount, because this impacts your return on investment, right? Is
Hmm.
what's the least amount of money that I can put into a property to control that property,
Yeah.
and what's the highest return on my investment? That's how I'm looking at it. A homeowner or a consumer is just more thinking maybe long-term investment, right? It's like,
Hmm.
okay, cool, I've got this asset. Maybe I bought it in a really good neighborhood, so it's going to appreciate over the next 30 years and things like that. Investors are looking to kind of, I guess, supercharge or turbocharge that
Right.
return, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah, absolutely. So disciplined investors, they're not chasing deals, they're following criteria, they're following models, they're following a process, they're following systems. And the most successful investors are very consistent with that approach. So just to review, um, consumers are driven by emotion, investors are driven by data.
mhm.
Consumers are focused more on the cost, and then good investors focus on the return. If something is out of our budget, if you find a good deal and it is out of your budget, you got people on this call right now that can help you fund this deal. The money is there. If a deal is good, the money is there. Even if it's out of your personal price range, if you find a good deal, the money is there always. And
Yes.
then consumers are focused on ownership and while investors are focused on the control of the deal.
Hmm.
Right?
Yes,
So
sir.
three mindsets, their mindset shifts to start applying immediately. And again, ask yourself these questions, am I asking this? Number one, can I afford this? So instead of asking, can I afford this? Start with the question, what does this asset produce? What
Mhm.
are the results? What is the return of this asset? Even if I don't have the money, don't worry about the money. Think about the deal first.
Yeah.
The
I
money,
used to be so intimidated by that. Don't worry about the money, and the times that I was worried about the money, it caused delays in my decision making, and those delays cost me deals.
yeah,
You know,
it does.
I mean, you have to prepare, right? You need to be prepared to to take deals down, right? That are good deals. You got to be prepared. So I'm not saying you just sit back and say, okay, cool. I'm not going to worry about the money ever. I'm just going to go find a good deal, and then the money will change. Is that what you're saying, Alberto? No, or that the money will come. No, that's not what I'm saying. Like you're going to go prepare for it. But even though like I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash reserves, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to that I stop looking for deals. That I stop sourcing leads, that I
Hmm.
stop taking referrals, right? Because if the deal is a good deal, you're right. I can talk to investors, I can talk to my circle of influence. I can just tell people about the deal. And if it's good enough, someone's going to fund it.
That's right.
And I've always got a fallback, right? I've got a
Hmm.
fallback. I go to banks and things like that to get hard money and whatever. But
Yeah. And that's why we go back to like building your network and making
mhm,
connections and knowing who's in your corner because when a deal too good to be true comes along, you don't want to lose it because you're not in a position to make a move on it. You know,
right.
that
But
you,
that's developing that mindset of like you just like, to sum up this first point, right? Is stop asking, can I afford this? And then start asking, right, what does this asset produce? How is
yep.
this asset going to help me? How is this asset going to add to my net worth that's going to help me build wealth over the long term? and give me a bunch of these other benefits like we talked about in our other shows, right? Debt pay down, the tax benefits and things like that. So
And then debt. This is a huge one, and it's always controversial, especially to like our Dave Ramsey fans. We don't,
I'm a
yeah,
Dave Ramsey graduate.
and so am I. And I've taught the Total Money Makeover and Financial Peace University. We are not proponents of consumer debt. Debt can be used as a tool. If you put 20% down on a property and it appreciates by 5% per year, that's an internal rate of return of 40 of 20%. So that's a huge, because you're not just earning that 5% um, on on the value of the property because you only put in 20%
Hmm.
of the value. So you're actually earning 4 times as much or 5 times as much on your initial investment. That's the only way that debt can be, um, I guess, manipulated, or you can take advantage of debt. View debt as a tool, not as a threat. Now, if you're not measuring and you're using a credit card to buy all a bunch of stuff that you don't need, that's just dumb.
Yeah.
Investors need to do really good math. It has to be structured correctly. And if you're not sure, come talk to Albert or Austin. We will help you. And then the third one is judge decisions based on the opportunity cost, not convenience. That's a tough pill to swallow, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're always looking for something. I think human nature, again, always looking for something that's going to make our lives either more convenient or more comfortable.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about investments, those things are just kind of out the window. But more so, like what people don't really consider is what if I don't do anything, right? If I just sit here and don't make the decision or I don't take that leap to become an investor, right? Think of all of the wealth for future generations that you are just sidestepping. You're like,
Yeah.
no, because it makes you uncomfortable, or
Yeah.
I've got to do extra work, or I've got to wake up earlier, or I've got to stay
Yeah.
up later. You know what I mean? Or I've got to sacrifice some of my personal time because I need to underwrite properties or find a coach or, attend, go to a meetup and do these things that are going to pay dividends in the future. That opportunity cost is if you don't do anything, you just never know what could have been.
Yeah. It's just thinking about that point, I can look back on 2025 and identify several times where I was stepping over dollars to save pennies
Yeah.
because when something happens, or maybe I didn't spend time looking deeper into deals, like deals are selling. Like we are in a buyer's market, obviously inventory is high, we all know that, but did you know even though interest rates are high, days of market are high, inventory is high, sales prices are going up
Hmm.
despite all that criteria. So there are, which tells us that there are plenty of buyers and investors out there that are taking advantage of the opportunities that a market like this presents. It's probably not happening as easy as it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
but it's happening. And I guarantee you, you go back to the Great Recession in 2008, we know people that bought property there. Those are the guys that have the most unrealistic expectations of what this market's supposed to be doing. And it's not unrealistic because they're living in a dream world. It's unrealistic because they lived through those huge, like flipping a house and making $100,000. Like I haven't seen that in
Hmm.
years, but there was a time when that happened. That could happen again, but smart investors know that the best opportunities come in like the toughest times, and you have to work harder in markets like this to make deals happen. But as you've proven here in the last 30 to 60 minutes with your closing, it's doable and you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to do it. We were talking about like tripping over dollars, right, to save pennies and just developing that mindset again, getting out of that consumer mindset of can I afford this or what's this cost going to be?
Hmm.
I mean, just over the past, like I made a decision last week on this. So I've told you about our property in Galveston that we couldn't sell for like 2 years, and I had an opportunity to make this one design change at the very beginning of the property, at the very beginning of the project, which would have cost us about $5,000 more,
Yeah.
but it ended up costing us about $25,000 more later, including the time and the interest and all that, in order for us to sell the property.
Hmm.
So on this new flip that we have, once the property was completely cleared out, I didn't put in the budget for foundation work. I didn't have it in the budget. But once the property was completely cleared out of all the junk, I definitely noticed some sloping on the
Hmm.
back part of that house, and I was like, okay, like I didn't put this in the budget, but I need to call my foundation guy.
Yeah.
Right. He comes over, gives me a couple bids. I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's just level the backside of this house. It has to be level. So that was like an extra 6 grand. Right. That's coming from my profit margin. The profit margin was good. Now it's okay. Right. It's not a loss. I mean, we're gonna make money, but I had to do that,
Yeah.
you know. If you're not in the right mindset, you might think to yourself, well, maybe the new buyers won't notice, right?
Right.
Or maybe I can put some staging over here or
Hmm.
whatever, right? So just learning quickly from your mistakes is powerful too for your mindset.
Huge, huge, huge.
Yeah.
So just to kind of boil it down, the question is, how am I thinking like an investor? How am I thinking like the consumer? What are the differences? What are the questions that typical consumers ask themselves when approaching a deal or approaching an opportunity? What are the questions that investors ask themselves when approaching a deal or some real estate investing opportunity? So let's talk about what's coming up next because we've got 52 episodes planned for 2026. Um, you have special guests line up. We're taking things to the next level. So over this next few weeks, Alberto and I are going to be diving deeper into investor decision making frameworks. Next week, we'll be talking about lifestyle goals versus portfolio goals. We have special guests from Austin, Texas, Megan Flake, great commercial real estate agent and investor from Austin, Texas, will be joining us. So please tune into that show. We're going to be talking about risk tolerance, capital allocation. We're going to be talking about long term holding versus short term holding, how experienced investors evaluate deals differently. So we'll be featuring some very special guests, some really smart and experienced investors. And then moving forward, be paying attention because February is going to be critical. And we're going to have some really cool guests in February. February is going to be our tax strategy and business setup. So we're
Yeah.
going to be talking about depreciation and deferred tax strategies, LLCs, personal ownership, asset protection, um, things like
Bookkeeping, right?
yeah.
Operating your real estate as a business, right? And not like a hobby. We're going to bring my CPA in, Andre. He's helped out several investors that I've referred him to. He's gotten people out of really messes,
Hmm.
just a bird's nest of tangled transactions and just people. I have one investor, a very good friend of mine. She told me that this year she's been investing for about the same amount of time we have, for about 5 years. She says this year was the first year where December 31st, she was caught up and ready for tax season. This is the first time. And she
Yeah.
said it was only because, the CPA that I recommended to her, our CPA, helped her get everything in order. So
Well, I am looking forward to
February's
that.
gonna be powerful. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm looking for that.
That's going to be awesome. And then March, deal analysis, intensive cash flow, NOI, returns, expense assumptions, reserves, reality checks, financing. We'll be talking to different lenders, different types of financing. We have private financing on residential, private financing on commercial,
Mhm.
hard money, DSCI loans, you name it. So we will be jumping all through that and providing tons of value for everybody. And then it just goes on from there. So we're gonna have a really good year. Here's your close, your call to action here. As you move through this week, start paying attention to your internal dialogue. That's critical. This is where we need to start. Internal dialogue. How am I thinking like a consumer? How am I thinking like an investor? When you look at a property, you look at a purchase or even a personal expense, you got to ask yourself, am I thinking like a consumer? Am I thinking like an investor? Two very powerful ways to think about it. So don't forget Deal Flow Network. We do have our happy hour on the 22nd at El Tiempo.
Oh,
Comment or send me a text if you want an invitation to that. So that's going to be a really great networking event, January
okay.
22nd. That's Thursday. And then we are hosting deep dives throughout the week where we just do a deep dive on certain assets. So tomorrow is Tuesday. We'll be doing a multifamily deep dive. We will be streaming that on Facebook and on Zoom. We'll be doing a retail and office deep dive on Wednesday, and then a residential deep dive on Thursday. So if you're interested in being on that call, send me a text. Let me know what, if you have a certain asset type that you really want to get deeper in. We can do that. We'll be doing industrial as well, but
Okay.
we're not going to do hotels. That's just not my thing. But maybe eventually we'll get somebody on there. So if you're serious about sharpening your investor mindset, those sessions are where clarity turns into action. And we'll see you there. And then we'll pick this up next week. So, any final thoughts, Alberto, on the new year?
I mean, I'm really happy that we decided to start off the year with mindset. Just it's so important, is that the thoughts that you think on a daily basis, if they're positive, then there's a really good chance your life's going to be headed in a positive direction. I'm not saying that you can make things happen by thought, right? Or some kind
Hmm.
of like, I know like people were kind of big on manifestation and things like that. I get it. Like you kind of want to speak these things into the universe or just out there, but you can't just do that. That's a start. And that's why we're starting with it. You got to take action. You have to work on it. A lot of the things that we talked about over the past year, we're just kind of starting here. Now, here's the baseline. Start with mindset, get your thoughts right, start thinking like an investor, and everything else doesn't necessarily just fall into place like magically.
Hmm.
It's you're training your reticular activation
Yeah.
system, right? You're think if you like you want to buy a red truck now, all you can see are red trucks everywhere because now your
Yeah.
mind is focused on it. You want to invest in real estate. Like I literally drive down the street and I start noticing properties that I never really noticed before because I'm a real estate investor
Yeah.
now, or I'm starting to think about creative deals, not just with real estate, but like, other things in life, whether it be a vehicle or some appliances or whatever it is. Like, how can I get this creatively with as little money out of pocket as possible? So I'm really happy that we're starting this year off with mindset. I think these next few episodes are super important, whether people are joining live or watching them after the fact. As after you get them uploaded to YouTube. I've already talked to a few friends, Austin, and telling them about the podcast. And like, hey, if you can't join at 12:30, no worries. I'll send you the YouTube videos. But super excited. I think they're wanting to invest, and I'm like, hey, let's start here, and then we'll go from there.
Perfect. Well, we're definitely looking forward to an amazing year and getting started off with our mindset series in January. Next week we'll continue with lifestyle goals versus portfolio goals, how to balance that, how to approach that, how to think about that. And then again, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like our Facebook page. Go find Alberto. He's on all this. I logged into TikTok for the first time in like 6 months, and the only thing on my feed was just all about Alberto's videos. So,
Because I mean, you're following like five people, so
so we'll work on that. But yeah, like us on Facebook and then YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and have a wonderful first full week of the year. Alberto, be blessed. Rick, thank you,
too, brother.
sir. Simba, Hal, Javier, Rick, Richard, thanks for being on the call. Have a great week. Bye.
All right, man.